G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. Well, land acknowledgements, or as we call them here in Australia, the welcome to country, or an acknowledgement of country if it's being performed by someone who is not themselves Indigenous. These have been roiling Australian culture and media for the past week. Because last Friday was Anzac Day, which is one of the, I suppose, holiest days on the Australian calendar. It's a public holiday, and it's a sort of a combination between Remembrance Day and a national day. Technically, it commemorates the Gallipoli campaign in World War I, where Australian soldiers for the first time were sent in vast numbers to support Britain's effort. It was in Turkey. Long story short, we got the shit kicked out of us, and it was the first time that Australia really forged a national consciousness, a common national imperative, after having become a country in only 1901, just a decade or so beforehand. And this has subsequently become a way of not just honouring all Australian servicemen and women, but really honouring the country itself, because our national day, our official sort of 4th of July equivalent, happens to fall on the date when Europeans, the British Empire, first landed on the soil of Australia and declared it to be terra nullius, an uninhabited land, despite the fact that there were hundreds of civilizations here who'd been living here for tens of thousands of years. So it's a little bit impolite, a little bit impolitic to celebrate on January 26th, which is the anniversary of that inauspicious day. So Anzac Day has kind of become a de facto national day. And it starts every year with a dawn service in every city and every town where people gather in a park or a communal square, and they pay homage to the remembrance of people who've given their lives for this country and sort of pay tribute to what a great country this is. They spend the second half of the day getting shit-faced drunk and gambling in pubs, but we don't need to go there. That's irrelevant. In recent years, the dawn services on Anzac Day have been opened, as are all official events in Australia and many unofficial events these days, with land acknowledgements, a welcome to country, where an Indigenous Australian will get up and talk about his mob and the various other mobs and the people. That's what we call a clan, I guess, a family, a large tribe of Indigenous Australians, and their relationship to the land and how they welcome everybody to the land, and it clears the air and creates a sort of a spirit of communal commonweal. Or at least it's supposed to, because on Friday morning at the main event in Melbourne, the main dawn service, which was attended by 50,000 people, in the pre-dawn light, the Indigenous elder got up and began to speak. And some people in the audience, who turned out to be neo-Nazis or neo-Nazi adjacent, at least one of whom has since been charged, began to heckle and shout things like, "This is our country, and we don't need to be welcomed to it." This has set off a firestorm in Australia, largely because these kinds of welcomes, and in an even greater number, what's called an acknowledgment of country, where there is no Indigenous person present, but the white person goes through the motions of saying to the other white people at the HR meeting or in an office or on a Zoom call, I acknowledge the traditional elders of the land, past, present, and future, and I, respect their custodianship of these ancient lands and blah, blah, blah. I don't mean to diminish the intent of these things, but I do mean to diminish how pro forma and formulaic and insincere they've become, the way they've become a currency for white people to demonstrate to each other that they're on the right side of history without having to make any real sacrifices towards Indigenous Australians. I think it's worth, before we get into this, listening to a few minutes of the speech itself, because I suspect that a lot of the people who are bloviating about it haven't actually heard how disruptive the interjections were. Have a listen or a look, if you're on YouTube, at this.
Good morning. I am Uncle Mark Brown, and I'm an elder and senior cultural heritage officer of the Bunurong people. I'm a Gunditjmara man on my mother's side, and I'm a Bunurong man on my father's side. And this morning, I'm here to welcome everybody to my father's country. Beautiful Bunurong country. But before we do that, we pay our acknowledgements and we pay our respects. We pay our respects to all of my ancestors. We pay our respects to all of my elders. And we pay respects to all of my community members, past, present, and emerging. And we acknowledge the continuous and unbroken connection to country for the Bunurong people. We also pay our acknowledgements and respects to all traditional custodians of Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, who work, rest, live or play on Bunurong country. We acknowledge their continuous and unbroken connection to country for all of their people. And we thank each and every single one of them for being here with us. But today, on the sacred lands of the Bunurong people, we all gather in the spirit of respect and unity. These are the traditional lands and territories of the Bunurong people that I welcome everybody to today. And as I said, we have a deep spiritual connection to our lands. And we have a strong cultural identity tied to our ancestral plains. All of our stories, our traditions, our language, our culture, and Bunjil's law are interwoven with the very fabrics of the soils that surround us, reflecting my people's profound knowledge, wisdoms, and ongoing custodianships to all of our ancient lands.
Now, my first reaction to hearing or seeing that, I think like most people's, is horror. It's incredibly disrespectful and rude. This guy is doing what he was hired to do. You know, the Indigenous elder didn't appoint himself, didn't parachute in against the will of the organizers of this event. It's massively disrespectful. And in general, I have a no heckling and no disrupting of things policy. But what struck me in the subsequent days, and what many of you have written in and emailed asking for my thoughts about, is the subsequent pivot that was made in much of the national conversation on the left and the centre-left in mainstream outlets like the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and The Guardian and the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, which was to equate any subsequent conversations about the authenticity or utility or ubiquity of acknowledgements of country with racism. To say the only reason why anyone on the radio or in print or on television or in the quiet of their own home would raise questions or roll their eyes about a bunch of middle-aged white women sitting around a Zoom call doing acknowledgements of country is because they are basically on the same spectrum as the neo-Nazis. They really just don't think that Indigenous people should exist. And that, to me, is the kind of obviously fatuous and glib move that has got us into so much trouble over the past 10 years on the left, that has tried to dodge having real conversations about real things and instead used sort of pro forma formulaic behaviour and obedience to dogmas and social justice orthodoxies as substitutes for fair dinkum conversations. Let me give you an example in case you are thinking, but hang on, Josh, all I saw was a nasty person on a right-wing radio station saying that, you know, we're doing welcomes to country too much. Well, I saw that. And then I heard a podcast from some of the most well-credentialed Australian journalists saying that for a radio announcer to say that we do acknowledgements of country and welcomes of country too much is itself just racism, pure racism. I mean, which is the more unthinking and knee-jerk response? The one that tries to pass out the utility of the thing, or the one that says that any attempt to do so is prima facie evidence of a crime of bigotry? And if you're not in Australia, it's probably important to give you an impression of just how widespread acknowledgements of country have become here. It is not like any other country, really. In the past 10 years, maybe 20 years at the most, they have become so normalized, so de rigueur, that it's almost like if you went to a very religious country where everybody says grace before a meal. It would be something that you would immediately notice, and that foreigners do immediately notice every time they come to any conference or any kind of a speech or any kind of a formal event or even informal event, in a corporate event in Australia. When your aeroplane lands on a normal domestic flight, the plane lands and the first thing that the purser says over the intercom is, we welcome you to the lands of the traditional owners of the land, and et cetera, et cetera. It happens. It's all over the place. I got to the airport not long ago, and the departures board, which lists all of the cities which are destinations for the flights, I looked up and I couldn't recognize a single name except for one name, which was the Indigenous name for Melbourne, which I happen to know, Naarm. And then all of those names changed to the actual, to the English, Australian names. And then they went back and they were cycling through the Indigenous name and the regular name. Now, is the purpose of the departures board to assist passengers in finding out what gate their flight is departing from and whether it's delayed? Or is it to signal to them that the airline and the airport are on the right side of history and that their hearts are in the right place when it comes to reconciliation with First Nations Australians? All of which is simply to say there is an actual conversation to be had here, because this latest furore is occurring in a particular climate that is particular to this nation. Recently, Sydney's number one radio announcer, Ben Fordham, who hosts The Breakfast Show on 2GB and who is a sometime guest on this show as well, was discussing these course curricula which are required for undergraduate students at Australia's most illustrious Ivy League universities, where in addition to their coursework, they need to undertake sort of social justice mandated training programs, one of which is an Indigenous training module. I'll hand it over to Ben to tell you what the module says.
Let me read some material from the Macquarie University module. By the way, this is not available on the uni's website. When students are forced to learn about Aboriginal culture, the compulsory module states, and I quote, "If you are living in Australia and you are not an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, you are a settler and therefore a guest." If you are living in Australia and you are not an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, you are a settler and therefore a guest. Seriously, can these people just off? We are done with you. We're sick of people trying to divide us. These students just want to expand their learning and broaden their horizons, and they cannot start their study until they sign up to this twisted notion of owners versus guests or settlers. I'm not a guest. I'm sorry, I'm not a guest. I know that as a fact. I've been here 48 years. And let's go back to the woke Macquarie University rule book and listen to all the talk about guests. They say many guests are also concerned about getting it wrong or causing offence. It is important that guests also take the time to ensure they have a deeper understanding of colonialism. Guests, I'm sorry, speak for yourself. I'm not a settler. I'm not a guest. And I don't care if you only became an Aussie last week. This is your country too. You are not a guest.
Now, for Ben Fordham to say that on the air heralds a kind of a shift in the national temperament about these things. I don't think he could have or would have said that 2 years ago. There is a bubbling up of frustration about the tokenism and the mandatory nature of these rituals. And that atmosphere is what is completely lacking in so much of the mainstream centre-left media's coverage of what happened on Anzac Day. Let me give you a few examples. The co-chairs of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, Reuben Berg and Nara Murray, called the incident on Anzac Day a racist attack. The leader of the Greens Party, Adam Bandt, said there's no room for hate, division or racism on this day or any day. Jessa Rogers, writing in the Sydney Morning Herald, wrote, "To mock or reject a welcome to country is to deny the enduring sovereignty of Aboriginal peoples and the profound connection we hold to our country. It's to misunderstand what is being offered, a generous gesture of cultural welcoming." The Kamilaroi veteran Dean Duncan was at the service, and he's quoted as saying, after the referendum, this was the referendum to amend the Australian Constitution to create an advisory body of First Nations Australians, it failed. He says it's emboldened people so much they've got this backup to be blatantly racist, and they're protected by it by saying, Australia voted and we don't want to recognise you. We don't want to recognise you. Ken Wyatt, who's a former Liberal minister and the first Indigenous minister for Indigenous Australians, says, I'm disappointed with anybody who doesn't take the time to understand the importance of friendship, welcoming and acknowledging that you are part of the community and you're being welcomed into somebody's home country, home region, and to politicise it just adds to the division. These are all nice words, and I'm sure they make sense to the people who are saying them, but they fail, I think, to connect with the concerns of the people who feel like the welcome to country itself is a source of division. They don't actually get us any closer to understanding what unity might look like. And it's not only left-wing media folks who are bamboozled by this. Reporters on the centre-right are as well. One of the most mainstream news organisations in Australia, the Nine Network, interviewed a veteran at the Dawn Service right after the heckling had taken place. This was a youngish guy by the looks of him, probably a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan or the campaign against ISIS, not a Vietnam or World War II veteran. And this guy was sympathetic with opposition to the welcome to country, even though he opposed the heckling. He said that many of his friends who are veterans stay home from dawn services on Anzac Day these days because they can't be bothered sitting through 5 minutes of an Indigenous elder telling them that they should be grateful to be welcomed onto the land that they fought and some of them died to protect. So here's this interview. And I think what's interesting about this is fairly short, but what's interesting is just listen to the reporter, who is a Channel 9 reporter, basically a centre-right, if anything, news organisation, who really either can't understand or pretends not to be able to understand that it might be possible that both sides are in the wrong here.
To get up there and boo in the middle of what is a sacred ceremony is going to be seen by a lot of people as disrespectful.
Yes, but that's where we, as Australians, and you as the media, need to tell the right story. Like, yes, it was disrespectful, but these are the reasons why people are not agreeing with it. Mm-hmm. Because it's not the right time or place for it.
But not the right time and place for what?
For both. For the welcome to the country and for the booing.
That was a veteran speaking with the Channel 9 reporter on 9 News at the dawn service after the heckling. And one response by people who think that welcomes to country are not too overdone is to say, well, Anzac Day, if any day, is particularly apt for a welcome to country because Indigenous Australians serve in the military as well, and they did serve at Gallipoli too. This is a point that was raised on the Channel 10 television show The Project by an Indigenous elder who was asked whether or not Anzac Day should be free from welcomes to country. Here's what he had to say.
This division should not exist because when we talk about Anzacs, the machine gun bullets didn't just rain on the Aboriginal people and the bombs didn't just fall on the non-Aboriginal people. It fell on everyone. And so it took everyone to fight back. And that meant that they fought together, they died together, but they emerged victorious together. And this should be the spirit of Anzac. It should be inclusion, not exclusion.
Inclusion, not exclusion, says the Indigenous elder who was interviewed on Channel 10. But it's not obvious to many Australians why dividing each other up by race is inclusive and not exclusive. The veterans who oppose the welcome to country at the dawn service think that they are acting in favour of inclusivity by treating everybody as included instead of divvying up the population into people who belong here and those who are merely guests. And yes, we can talk all day about the fact that Indigenous people have served honourably in the armed forces, but I mean, there were 50 to 70 Indigenous Australians who fought at Gallipoli. The campaign itself had more than 500,000 Allied fighters, of whom 50,000 odd were Australian. So yeah, you don't want to overlook the 50 Indigenous Australians who were there and I'm sure fought valiantly. But it's not a great argument for why they should get special, unique consideration versus the remaining 49,950 who were non-Indigenous. This whole thing, frankly, exhausts me. I'd rather be talking about other things, but I do think it's symptomatic of a problem that we're getting wrong on the left. The problem is bigger than land acknowledgements and welcomes to country. It's bigger than First Nations rights. It's bigger than race. It's really a question of identitarianism versus universalism. I often have conversations with other people on the left who say, look, sure, the social justice movements of the past 10 years just went a little bit too far, when it comes to the racial reckoning or the George Floyd riots or, the things that you could say about, women's rights versus transgender rights. Yes, we went a little bit too far. Now it's pulling back. No, I don't think we went too far. What happened was that the instinct for progressive universalism split off into two. And on one strand, those of us who remain committed to a universalist ideal where all human beings are treated equally continued to maintain our fidelity to that aspiration, while another branch branched off that in a strange way had more in common with identitarian movements like white supremacy in terms of the complexion of the way that it saw the world, although maybe not in terms of its moral valence, than it did with we who remained on the traditional universalist left. This new branch said, there's no point in being aspirational about your naive delusions of all people being treated equally. We live in a fundamentally and irredeemably racist, sexist, patriarchal society, transphobic and bigoted. And all we can really do is try to fight for historically disadvantaged communities to get a bigger slice of a finite pie. That, to me, is not just a matter of going too far. It's not that they took a good idea and the idea just went a little bit overboard and now we have to pull that good idea back. No, if it was a good idea, there would be no excess of having a good idea. The problem is that a vision originally articulated by the likes of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela and most recently articulated by Barack Obama has been perverted into a much cruder and more hostile form of identitarianism. And I suspect that what's going on in Australia over the past week is feeding into some of the resentments and antagonisms that have flared up as a result of that. I think it might be worth just listening to the words of the man himself, Martin Luther King, from his famous I Have a Dream speech, which is probably the most important articulation of civil rights of the past century, and just hear a little bit of how he wanted to frame this question.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. Yeah. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
I defy anyone to listen to that and not get a little bit of a chill up their spine. It's probably the clearest articulation of the vision towards which we should all aspire. And that vision is one in which little black boys and girls stand hand in hand with little white boys and girls. It's not clear to me that constantly insisting that we frame ourselves as colonized versus colonizer, as occupied versus occupier, as black versus white, is the best way of achieving that vision. On the other hand, I don't want to be a reactionary white colonizer asshole, so rather than just talk at you, I wanted to inform myself by speaking to one of the wisest First Nations Australians I know of, Tyson Yunkaporta. He's an Aboriginal scholar. He's the founder of the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab at Deakin University in Melbourne. He's written fantastic books like Sand Talk and Right Story, Wrong Story. He focuses on applying Indigenous methods of knowledge to modern complex issues and to global crises. I started by asking him about the social justice reckoning of the past 10 years and what exactly he thought had happened. I hope you enjoy as much as I do the one, the only, Tyson Yunkaporta.
I think there was a spectacular flourishing over a couple of years of, the powerless, the marginalized, or people who perceive themselves to be marginalized, to suddenly have some social capital they could leverage to, disempower your traditional bullies. You see this if you look at Gen Z, and there's a couple of interesting studies coming out now about this split in Gen Z, where half of them are moving drastically towards the right. And when they analyzed the data, they saw that it was anyone in Gen Z who hadn't graduated before the pandemic, before COVID, that they're just all stampeding towards the right now.
Why do you think?
Well, the analysis was that where the kind of what they call cancel culture, where that kind of unsettled a lot of your traditional bullies, in a school, which is a good microcosm for the world. In this case, where that unsettled all the traditional bullies who suddenly found themselves not holding the power. And then you had sort of, people who were more weak or marginal before that. They suddenly had the jackboots on, and so they were able to kick back at the bullies with something. And, there were, little structures and processes of how you would sort of beat someone into submission, with your rhetoric about wrong speech or whatever.
Tangle them up in HR complaints rather than actually beating their head in the street like a neo-Nazi would. But
then, these little systems like schools and colonies, they require bullies and bullying. So suddenly you see this ecological niche, just empty of, the kids that dack you, rip your pants down
you mean those
on parade and beat you up and flush your head down the toilet. Suddenly there was a void, and in rushed all these, the stereotypical purple hair people, kind of rushed in and went, well, shit, I guess we're the bullies now for about 5 minutes.
Yeah. And, Well, I'm not sure they thought it was 5 minutes. I mean, I think they thought this was going to be a new and better order where right-minded people would be able to be on top and the racist sexists would remain on the bottom forever, and you could just shame them in perpetuity into not, I mean, I've always, you know me, like for 10 years I've been shouting from the rooftops, do not try to turn the volume up as far as you possibly can on identities and expect that forever young white males will agree not to assert their own identity, because they're the most dangerous people in the history of the world, and you don't want them identifying by their whiteness and their maleness. Bad shit goes down when young white males identify as white males. And to me, this is, I mean, I've been saying this would happen for years. The chickens are going to come home to roost if you think that everyone gets to be proud of their identity except one group.
Man, I remember in high school, like, so when I was a kid, like, you know, I'd get like bashed a fair bit, you know, with the whole part abo thing, but I did get more than that, but what they used to call pufta bashing, you know, because you know, the schools around mining camps and stuff like that, you know, those barefoot schools. If you're someone who reads books, you're a pufta, like,
yeah,
you know. So I got quite a bit of pufta bashing.
They should get a load of me, Tyson, if they want a pufta.
Yeah, I mean, that's it.
You know,
that's it. See how you go.
Yeah, got a wedding ring on, for Christ's sake.
But yeah, I did a couple of things. I learned to fight like really, really well, and you know, and then I also, you know, I also like got a lead role in a musical.
Yeah, that'll show them you're not a pufta.
Just got up with complete, you know, courage and sang my little heart out, you know, and that's my moment of triumph for about 5 minutes. But I got to tell you, backlash is a thing. Nobody likes to have their power taken away. So the pufta bashings that followed were, you know, put a fellow in a hospital. Yeah, the people trying to kill you. Even in high school, you know. I guess, you know, there's always these extreme backlashes. So if you got people sitting there, like, you know, accepting welcome to country for about 5 years or a decade, and they're sitting silently through it, but it's annoying them, or they're kind of stewing about it, you know, they're sort of thing, hey, I'm not being racist, just, you know, it's a little too much, isn't it? And, you know, or like if there's a day where they want to honor their grandfather, it's just, not on this day, God damn it. You don't get to annoy me on my birthday. Sorry, my grandfather's war day. So I guess that just kind of bubbles up. You know, it also appeals to people. So they always get these little wedge issues, you know, they identify them and make sure they can sort of pivot any of the questions about bloody, you know, economic policy, or, you know, what the hell are we going to do about housing prices, and just sort of pivot everyone's energy into this.
Yes.
And, you know, and there has to be there has to be a group that's being victimized and defended, you know, in that kind of little culture war, and then off we go. It's really boring. I haven't even been following it. Josh. Like, you know, I just learned more about it from you than Mob been talking to me about it and rolling their eyes. But yeah, just in the last 5 minutes, just before I jumped on the thing, I had a quick flick around Google to see what was being said out there, and I'm like, oh, Dutton's there doing his thing, you know. But like I said, that's the role of the few bad apples, is to
honestly
get that wedge in the door.
I find it exhausting that we waste our attention on these kinds of culture war distractions, and at the same time, I have to push back against the narrative from my own cohort on the centre left, which says that it's all the fault of the fact that the half of the country that's conservative are racists, and that's the reason why these distractions are being raised. These distractions, that it wasn't the conservatives, and it wasn't even the neo-Nazis who started the question of acknowledgements of country and welcomes to country being mandatory or not mandatory. That was my side. That was our side that turned it into a thing which could have been, if we lived in a demos with a healthier ethos of communication, which could have been a good gesture that then got hashed out through honest conversation, where we go, okay, this is a good new thing. It's nice that we do it at award ceremonies. It's nice that we do it at the opening of Parliament. Maybe we don't need to do it before every, quick catch-up meeting that we're having in the staff kitchen every Tuesday. But you weren't able to say that because our conversation is broken, because people with pitchforks and flaming torches would take you to the cleaners if you're an ordinary person. I mean, I do it and I get taken to the cleaners for it, and that's fine. That's my job. But if you're an ordinary office worker, you don't want to stick your head above the parapet and have that argument. So you do go along with it and you do stew, and it reaches the point at which, because people haven't been able to have constructive conversations about it, now you get this, eruption. If you're going to be called a neo-Nazi for questioning the orthodoxy of welcomes to country, then the only people who will question the orthodoxy of welcomes to country are actual neo-Nazis. And we yield the territory of having that conversation to neo-Nazis, and now they're having it on their terms instead of ours.
What does productive discussion even look like post-truth?
Well, I mean, I think it would be
nothing. There's people bellowing monologuing into space, and recording and uploading, and someone likes it or dislikes it, and then bots comment, etc. Or it's debate me, bro.
Yeah.
And we've already had all these freaking debates. We didn't just have debates. There were massive advertising campaigns, like, demonizing bloody everything and anyone who wanted to do welcome to country. There was all these things, we already went through it. And, you end up with this, like, it is tokenistic, and I don't know. It's a specious argument to go, well, I only oppose welcome to country because it's not going far enough. It's like, come on, man. There's just, I don't know. I don't see any discussions that aren't about 60% logical fallacies. That are just like deliberately weaponized logical fallacies too, not just like an error in reasoning. Yeah. I don't see any of it. And I don't know, I haven't seen all the arguments, but I don't know if all of the argument from the left is just as simplistic as, well, racism.
I haven't heard anything better. I haven't heard anything better than the only reason why you would object to an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country is because of racism, and that's an attack on Indigenous people. And similarly, on the right, you're right that there's not a lot that's better than just, it's our country, we don't need to be welcomed here at all.
Yeah, but it's not legally compelled speech, is it?
What the
acknowledgement of country?
No, it's not legally
required to have a welcome to country or anything like this. So
no, but as well as I do that most of what's happened over the past 10 or 15 years in terms of the culture wars is not legally mandated. It's not legally mandated that you have to show deference to a certain set of ideas, or that you can't write in a certain way about pediatric transgender medical care or something. And nonetheless, people lose their jobs and people feel they can't say things. Stalinism wasn't entirely legally mandated.
Yeah, I mean, people lose jobs on both sides. Have you ever seen the movie The Hunt?
Yeah. That was about 5 years ago, where they all get dropped into the wilderness? And
I rewatched it last night. So it was like a whole heap of like, what they call in America liberals. Like people
kind of
who
woke
people who were like, pretty useless, even though they were doing something incredibly violent and highly organized. They were constantly, just falling apart by, policing each other's speech and all this sort of stuff. And what do you mean, those people, and all that kind of thing? Yeah, but they were, that they were accused of, being elites who are hunting deplorables. Hunting good, simple, conservative folk, for sport. It became Mannergate because they were supposed to be doing it in a manner kind of thing. And they all got the sack. Because, too, which is, I don't know, like the thing, I don't know. Hey, you find on the left, like, we don't tend to whinge about getting cancelled. I've been cancelled like 8 times from the left, but I'm more terrified, as I've said to you before, of being cancelled on the right. Anyway, yeah, so in this movie, they were it was the right that had cancelled them, and so they all got fired from these powerful positions. And but they had a lot of money, so they actually bought a manor in like Serbia or something, and
they all get released to
anybody who
kill?
was saying, like making up mean conspiracy theories about them online. Any right wingers, they were rounding them up and then dropping them in the middle of.
Oh, that's right.
Serbia,
yes, it's the right wingers who get released, and the lefties hunt them. Yeah, so it's like a visual, a literal manifestation of.
The central story, like, you know, as an Aboriginal person, I'm interested in the lore of a thing, and the lore of this movie was the hare and the tortoise story. But it was kind of like there was this kind of redneck girl from Mississippi or somewhere who was telling the story, and how her mother told it was after the tortoise beat the hare, the story kept going, and the hare actually went to the tortoise's house with a hammer and smashed up the tortoise's wife and kids and made him watch. And then smashed up the tortoise, and then sat down and ate their dinner while gloating over their dead corpses. You know, so that's the story that she'd been told. And I'm like, that's pretty spot on, actually. Yeah. And I don't know, I see all this. I see the distraction of the race between the hare and the tortoise, and, you know, and the stalwart, you know, tortoise with values and a staunch work ethic winning, but then the hare just, absolutely has his day. I don't know. You see this on the right, like, you know, on the left, when people gain ground, they don't know what to do with it. They just kind of mill around in a frenzy there until they get smashed right back, further back from where they were before. But the right, every inch, you know, is planned with a whole raft of trigger laws and you know, precedents in the culture and stuff like that kind of kick in when that inch is gained. And then it's suddenly, oh my God, that's 10 inches and it never moves again. But then the whole, you know, window has to move with them, you know, sort of shifting the whole spectrum.
What do you mean by that?
I can't think of an example of left-wing backlash. You know, like you have to go to like, you know, another cultural revolution in China or something like that.
Well, yeah, they use different tools, right? Because I mean,
they had the struggle sessions, which is pretty similar to what we saw in the whole, pandemic of pink.
I mean, it's not a traditional left-wing, well, with the exception of Stalinism, I suppose. It's not a traditional left-wing tactic to, no, actually, that's not true. I was going to say to force people to claim that they believe things they don't believe under threat of implied violence. But that's actually that's normal in Cuba, it's normal in Venezuela, it was normal in Stalinism, it was normal under Mao. It's not unusual, I don't think. It's just a different kind of wielding of power, right? It's a soft power of totalitarian ideology, really, and you know, mouthing platitudes and reading pro forma scripts to pledge your allegiance to things or your fidelity to a set of ideas, rather than the kind of crude identitarian bigotry that the far right exhibits.
Let me ask you this, Josh. If someone says that they've been hurt by something you say, like, what's your first thought? Is your first thought like concern for yourself, like, oh my God, what are people going to think? Or is your first thought, oh man, shit, I'm sorry, are you okay? You know, like, is your first thought concern for the person that you may have hurt, or is it concern for your own well-being? And has that shifted over the last decade?
To be honest, it's neither, if I'm honest. It's to quickly do an inventory about whether or not I believe that the thing that I said was wrong or needlessly harmful or antagonistic. And so it's to check whether or not I give credence to the claim of offendedness, because I don't regard all forms of offense as being equally wrong. And I think sometimes getting offended is a useful part of the rough and tumble of
Well, you're not married to a woman,
debate.
are you?
No, I'm married to a guy.
Well, yeah, See, there it is. Like you've got room to do that. It's one of the privileges of the position.
What were we saying about sexism and misogyny before?
Well, it's I don't know. So if you're married to a woman, or even I guess if you got a sister or something, it doesn't matter if it's valid, if what you've said is right or wrong or okay, but if feelings are hurt, like you have to address that.
I thought we were talking about in
you
public.
Have to validate their position. No, I'm just saying. So I get this training, like as a heterosexual person who doesn't do domestic violence. I get, I'm not the paterfamilias of this freaking house. So I've got that kind of training. My first instinct is concern for the other person, and I usually feel that when I get cancelled. Like first of all, I need to find out, what their experience is and how I've like contributed to their feeling of pain about that. And then I look at, well, what can I do to redress that, like realistically? And then what can I do to make sure that that person and the people they identify as, their community, how can I, in future, just make sure that I'm not causing people pain.
Right.
What can I don't believe
that.
What can I include at the start to help out? So I do that, but I don't, I don't shift my whole freaking worldview. Like I said, I've been canceled like 8 times, and I don't give a shit. I really don't care. I've been pulled up before as well for not doing acknowledgement, which I deliberately didn't do at the start of this. Acknowledge where I am, which I usually do. But just so that I could use it as an example.
Do you want to do it?
Your comments. Yeah, but first I just want to I don't know. I want data. I want you to have data. So like your comment section, you know what I mean? And you can have some data to look at that.
No, do it. Why don't you do it? Why don't you do an acknowledgement and then we can talk about it?
For me, it's got to weave in. I find it awkward to pronounce it. It's where you are is relevant. As a human being, you don't exist unless you're located. So to be able to locate, myself on Bunurong country and, under the auspices and welcome of Bunurong elders and being in that relation, it's relevant to me if I'm talking about this dish, this kulaman that I made like a couple of days ago. It's relevant for me to know that this is the time when the wombats are moving around, and so the sap is flowing in that eucalyptus tree. There's plenty of things that are, relevant to me about country here. What the weather's going to do, if it's going to rain, where that water's going to flow, if there's blockages in the infrastructure that are going to cause a flood, all of these things about being located. And, you have to be in a place. So, you acknowledge where you are if it's relevant. It's relevant to me, if I'm talking about, these things, and it has to weave in, so I haven't said the words I acknowledge. And sometimes I've been pulled up for that because I try and weave it into the conversation, so that it becomes part of people's consciousness and part of people's own identity,
Do you remember when you were pulled up for not doing it?
Oh, heaps of times. Lots conferences, things like that. Often interviews where people launch into the question so it's not there, and then I try and loop back around to it later. But there'll always be a couple of people, and then a sort of a growing mob later in the car park.
Sounds ominous.
Yeah. Although it's kind of cyber car parks where these rumbles happen now, they were deeply offended that you didn't do a formal acknowledgement of country. And it's just like, shit, well, Arnie did the welcome, and then there were 3 talks before me, and everyone acknowledged country. And, it's like, I don't know, the protocol is that, after the welcome or after the acknowledgement by the bloody people who run the thing, the protocol is that it's implied after that. But I like to weave it in because I'm not, anything I'm sharing with you is just nothing if it's not coming from place. And this, I don't know, like I showed you this one.
Most people are listening to this and they can't see it, but you're holding up. You're a wood carver, so people are. You're showing up a beautiful,
and it's
elongated bowl that you carved.
And it's made out of bark, but it's hard as rock. Now, but like I got the tools in here. I'll show you that I made for these, and that's sort of something you do for a couple of seasons before the sap starts running. Is you making the tools to do that? So the stone axe here and the stone knife, that meant that I had to be in relation with people on Dja Dja Wurrung country, and I had to do like different law stuff coming into the stories and the rules of country and of working with stone there. And they had to be calling out for their old people and putting their smell on me so that the old people recognize your scent. And that's like in my family, that's the welcome to country, is you just walk up to the person who's new and you rub your armpit sweat on them.
Right.
And that's so that the land recognizes the scent.
Can I opt out of the being wiped with armpit sweat when we next meet?
Only if you want to get bit by the dogs.
I don't. Is that the option, is it? Those are the two options.
The dogs don't recognize your smell and they come at you, so you want that armpit smell on you. It's good, pheromonal kind of thing. It doesn't stink.
If I ever want to get laid by a violent dog.
If the fella's been drinking, it's not good because you just get 90% proof sweat getting on there. But look, so Dja Dja Wurrung people there for that one, and then I didn't have to have permissions for the dugong bone on this pick because that's just from my country. I just finish eating dugong and then I keep one of the ribs and cut that up. It's but all these things in here. But the handle of it, that was I had to have relationships with Wurundjeri people. That's like a decade old. So you have these things, and you don't have to do like this. Welcome ceremony at the start in English or anything like that, because you get brought in all these other ways. And there are ceremonies for people who are coming in fresh in order to establish those relationships, make kinship, because for us, our boundaries, our borders are sites of increase, not sites of exclusion. They're not there to block people, but they're there to increase relationships. And the welcome to country, was modified, from these kinds of ceremonies that are often done at borders. It was modified, as a gift for Australian people, for settlers, to help them be located and therefore exist, in an awareness of what's around them. And it's very simple kindergarten 101 stuff. And that's as far as the bar moved. It's not like we've finished up with bloody land rights or anything like that. It's not like that's ever going to happen.
You're not getting my house, Tyson.
Real estate is not going to be land again. But there's this kind of, what we will give you is we'll say it's your land at the start, but we're keeping the real estate.
Yeah.
And so it's not much in terms of a concession to us, but it's a massive gift from us to the rest of Australia that we've got, this invading force here. And, at every event, we're welcoming you here to keep stealing stuff, basically, and allowing you to be, located beings in existence, which for us is everything, so it's it's a gift. The way our elders do it, they don't do it in an angry way or, they're doing it like in a loving way and making that gift. And it's anyone who's sitting in the audience, like simmering about that is a bit of a prick, really.
What you just said about the weaving in of the spirit of acknowledgement into your conversation, grounded in a sense of place, is precisely what I think is missing from the modern versions of this practice, where a frequently white person, usually white person, just by numbers, will go to a website which will instruct them about the precise catechism or slogan that they're supposed to recite. And then they will be judged by their fellow white people about their purity in being on the right side of history by how well they can recite, or at least how accurately they can recite that. And frequently any attempt to modify it or turn it into something more whimsical or playful or grounded in the reality of the community that they're in, is frowned upon because that's trampling over, a tradition that is not their own.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this sort of power move, essentially, among mostly white people. And when you say, I mean, I don't want to, at the risk of being more provocative or controversial or racist sounding, when you say it's an allowing in from the Indigenous person to the invaders, that's also kind of bullshit, isn't it? Because on what power base does the Indigenous person have the ability to welcome the invader in when the invader has so thoroughly steamrolled over everything and asserted his dominance over the country? It's like, so there's, so it
it's
feels
not a Westphalian kind of thing
right.
that we're
It's a
speaking
spiritual
from, is
thing.
it?
Yeah.
It's more about like, you're not, it's I am located, therefore I am. You have to be in the place where you are, and you call out the name of the language or people, which is also the name of the land. And when you say that word, you're saying that language word, which is the name of the people on the land or the language. Yeah, when you're saying it, that's calling out to the place. The place recognizes that word, and they recognize you. It's about being safe in our land. Our land is a dangerous place, and not just because there's some snakes that might bite you. It's for us, there are entities in the landscape that if you move in the wrong way against them, then you're not flowing with the energies of the land, and you're going to have difficulty. You're going to get sick. It's I don't know. It's supposed to be kind of helpful. It's like inviting people to be human, in the place that they're occupying. The goal of the elders is that eventually, people will be like dingoes. So, after a century or so, when dingoes first came here from Asia, they, that they made a mess initially because they didn't belong here, but they were welcomed into place, and they were given story, they were given dreaming. People took on the dingo as their totem. There was a relationship that was established. And after a while, the dingoes became autochthonous. Another word for that is naturalized, but that has other connotations. But it's basically when something that's not native to a place develops symbioses and relationships where they're in balance with the place. And the place is adjusted also to accommodate them. And they have a niche, So after a while, they're autochthonous. Another, I don't know, a few hundred years, then the dingo is not autochthonous anymore. It's indigenous. It's native, even though it doesn't have a pouch. And it's like one of two species here that has a womb. Everything else with fur and teddies has got a pouch, except for humans and dogs and dingoes, So I guess the goal is that all visitors here, all newcomers here will become autochthonous and will actually settle into a balance with the land, where they can't understand the land without spirit and without story. And this tiny little millimeter of sitting through a welcome, that's your induction. That's your induction. And I know there's virtue signaling by stupid white people about that, but you tell me one thing in all of creation that isn't used as a virtue signal by some idiot. Is there an issue or a thing in existence that doesn't get jujitsu'd around into somebody bloody going, oh, well, I value this, so I'm pretty freaking good. Oh, do you not value this? Do you not value this?
That's true, but it's a question of scale and whether or not the idiot who's doing the virtue signaling has a monopoly on cultural power, and whether people fear the consequences of questioning the idiot. I think I love what you just said about the autochthonous sort of aspiration. For me, it bumps into a question of whether or not the practical reality that white Australians are living through with regard to acknowledgements of country and welcomes to country is progressing towards that or detracting away from it. I think it's clearly progressing towards it if a person is on Aboriginal land and is engaged in something to do with Indigenous culture, then it's totally appropriate. It's probably appropriate in Parliament. It's appropriate at major, events. The trivialization of it, the tokenization of it, makes me just keenly aware of the sort of semiotic question of the different ways that symbols occur differently to different people from different places. So it reminds me a bit of when the US invaded Iraq and they wanted to put a big American flag at that main square in Baghdad to help the Iraqis celebrate their freedom. And I thought, well, the US flag means freedom to you, America. The US flag doesn't mean freedom to Iraqis. And similarly, Israel and Gaza, the kafir is an innocent gesture, and the Israeli flag might be an innocent gesture to an Israeli. But it doesn't mean the Israeli flag is not innocent to Palestinians, and the kafir is not innocent to Jews. And to me, the bridging of the kind of unity and universalism that will lead to this country moving towards a greater sense of its own destiny as a coherent destination with its past and genuine reconciliation is unlikely to be achieved by imposing symbolic behaviours that land for the recipient.
Well, they don't
as coercive.
Scale. They don't scale because those things are in denial of context.
Right.
That's why you have Welcome to Country, and that's why you have 500 plus different territories, because there's all these different local, everything is a different local context, different bioregion, different climate, different everything, different culture. And you have to know your context. And there aren't very many things that scale too well. And when you do try to scale something, you're going to lose meaning. It has to be simplified, and it has to be jingoistic. And I guess the Welcome to Country is quite a fragile thing because it's not very jingoistic and stirring, and it doesn't compel people towards a simple and very overwhelming feeling. Very much.
Well, it can sometimes also, if I'm honest, feel like a bit of a flex. Like the way it can sometimes be done will talk a lot about, and I'm not saying it's not true, but it will talk a lot about the timeless power and, tens of thousands of years of custodianship and true deep knowledge in a way that can make it feel a little bit like, I mean, okay, we could all get up and boast.
People who flex on that are just arseholes who flex on everything anyway, right?
But it's not intended as a flex. I don't think it's intended as a flex. I mean, I think for the Indigenous person who's giving, when I'm talking about a Welcome to Country, not necessarily an acknowledgement. Like the Indigenous person will get up and will talk with some pride for 5 minutes about the incredible, deep, timeless knowledge, and there can be, and that can land again for a certain type of perhaps not sufficiently informed new migrant to Australia in particular. I don't want to say white because I'm sure this is true of Arabs and Asians as well, as like, okay, bro, good. That's nice. Do I have to hear this every day?
Pride is like, is the consolation prize, from the powerful. Like, your mob has been awarded that, I don't know, that consolation prize as well. Gay pride, it's usually given to people who up until that point have been shamed and who live with shame ongoing.
Right.
So, basically you just think if you can, change your language, then you change the world. With our thoughts, we make the world. So let's just say pride and let's perform pride.
You can read my newspaper columns against
then
gay pride.
We can somehow lose our shame, but man, I haven't lost the shame every day.
But you don't feel shame for being black.
I take pride in the number of millennia that I've been around longer than others, in my tradition either, because, I mean, that's not exactly something that we used to count, millennia either. So, I don't.
Is it true that you don't feel pride, though? I get the sense that you feel pride in your heritage, and you don't feel shame. You're not ashamed of being black.
I think most of my pride stuff that I would feeling that I would identify as pride is inauthentic. It's more of a pushback, a protective emotional pushback against the shame, which I feel, all the time, like, especially with these Nazis all lubed up, and lubing things up. Like, I think I told you before that after the referendum, I got booed off the stage with not just booze, like they were shouting, F and coon and stuff like that. And, and within a very short time of that happening, my daughter comes home from school and asks me, Dad, what's a filthy abo? And then I got to explain that. I'm like, Jesus, I haven't been called these things since the 80s. The 80s was the last time I heard that, not because people got woke or politically correct what they were calling it in the 90s. It was because people sort of thought about it for a minute and went, that would feel like shit if someone said that to me. I think I might not say that.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's weaponized again, and it's out there. People are painting swastikas on Aboriginal murals around Melbourne, like as we speak. And these are just, everyone can condemn that, but then at the same time, then the discussions that come out of that are moved more towards while we're here, what is it with all these Aboriginal murals? It's like, what about a Dutch mural? There's plenty of Dutch people in Australia. How come they're not allowed to have murals? It's like, oh, for fuck's sake. So I don't know. That sat with me, like when they were shouting like multiple slurs at me from the audience, and this was in the Forum in Melbourne. It's a very highbrow establishment. These weren't Nazis who were like, strategically placed. It was more than half of the audience booing, and at least a dozen of them like shouting explicitly racist slurs. You didn't hear about it because I didn't immediately go on social media and frickin', like whinge about it. But my cousin Eric, he was in one of these flash in the pan culture wars a while back because he was the FaceTime prank guy. They were using this, this dark-skinned, weird-looking fella, and using it on the FaceTime to make it look like he was calling from a relative's phone. So people were answering the phone and seeing this black guy's face just sitting looking at the screen, and so the person that was pranking them would record them going, "What have you done with my daughter? You black bastard!" And anyway, it was a prank and went viral. And anyway, this so cousin Eric's face became like a meme for tens of millions of people. They even made a meme coin out of him. They made a meme coin out of his name. So Yunkaporta for a while was a trending meme coin. You and Donald, mate. But there was a whole thing, that came up about that, and the family got hounded by the media for a couple of weeks, looking for interviews. And, we had things to say about meme coin because that was exactly the same. That was like the week after Donald Trump's meme coin launched. And so, we saw the start of the Trump presidency and then this meme coin thing. And there's a lot of really big problems with that. And I don't know, we had a lot of things to say about, the problem of online privacy and data sovereignty and all this sort of stuff. And they weren't interested in that. They just wanted to get some sound bites of us saying how offensive and racist it was. So they didn't use any of mine, but they used my niece's stuff quite a bit because
you're too smart for them.
Angry words. Yeah. But so anyway, these things happen, but and they're kind of, nobody remembers that.
No.
In 2 weeks, no one's going to remember this shit either.
No.
But the field will have moved a little bit. It will have moved more towards, well, we do have to, consider these, people who love the traditions of Anzac, that, we have to respect that they, think that welcome to country's like fascist. That's
it
a
won't
valid
be
point of
that.
view. We do
it
have
won't
to,
be that. Not in any, mainstream way.
At the left and center, we're always like, very reasonable, because we still think discussions mean something.
Well, I do. I have
we still
to believe
in
that.
Productive discussions. And so, but that always just means, applying more lube for the extreme right.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
Sliding inevitably towards that was the slippery slope fallacy. I just used the weaponized fallacy.
Yes.
There we go.
No, mate. If there had been mature, rational left-wing conversations about this 4 years ago, then the right wouldn't be lubed up. The Nazis wouldn't be lubed up. The Nazis would be sidelined.
If people had heard any of the mature, rational conversations, then yes. But these are boring and very long things.
Yeah, but a lot of people listen to my boring conversations.
No, you're good. I'd nearly given up on decoding the gurus because I was just bored like 3 weeks in a row, and then you come and it just enlivened that little space up again.
Oh, good, thank you.
Yeah, you do good. You do good long form.
Well, thanks, mate. We've got like 2 minutes before I lose you. Do you want to? Do you want to just give some advice? I mean, I don't know if you're in a position to give advice, but to the 95% of left-wing white people who are not calling out and shouting at you and calling you a fucking coon and heckling people at Anzac Day services, like, what's the best? What should we be thinking or doing?
Well, just the same advice that I'd give you for all of the people who are going to be at you now for saying fucking.
They're going to clip that. There'll be a meme. There's going to be a meme coin of me just saying that.
And then it'll be back and forth. And no, it's not even racist because he doesn't even have dark skin. He's not even a proper Aboriginal person. Is he? How dare you say that? You can't trust someone's identity. It'll go everywhere. Well, there's no advice. We're in a post-truth world. It's like, just wait a couple of weeks if it's hurting you, and then have another look and see if it's all gone. But I don't know, like just, there's a whole economy around welcome to countries now. And that's just part of the economy. All the elders who advise, people because we get over consulted, and they do free consultations all the time. They get paid sometimes big amounts for welcomes to country. And this is what keeps them alive so that they can keep doing their role of being elders and providing safety nets for free. Yeah. So I don't know. It's all right. I don't personally get into it a lot, but I can see the need for it and that it serves a purpose. And I don't know. I think there's bigger things to worry about.
Yeah, I think there could
just
be
now. So I don't know.
Yeah. Tyson, great to talk to you. I'm going to let you go. I don't know whether that's a nihilistic way to end or like a philosophical, tranquil, humanistic way to end. I'll take it as the latter.
Yo, that's just my shame.
Thanks, mate. See ya.